Kristen. And hi, everyone. I hope you're all doing as best as possible during this challenging time. And I'm so glad that you're taking time for yourself and for this webinar. As Kristen said, my name is Joyce Marter, and I'm a licensed psychotherapist. I've been practicing for about 20 years. I really love it. It's very meaningful and rewarding work, and I'm super passionate about helping people live better lives by managing stress and improving their communication, which is certainly something that we all need right now. So today we're talking about family communication dynamics during times of stress, especially COVID-19. And want to thank the Brain Injury Alliance for inviting me and for all of their wonderful workshops that they provide. So I have all of the slides and all of the resources available to you through a text campaign. So if you'd like to write this down or pull out your phone and text the word coping to the number 33777, you'll get copies of all of the slides and some of the handouts. And I've also written some articles for Psych Central on essential employees and mental health issues for essential employees and the tips for family members. So I want you to have those. And if you didn't get it this time, I'm going to show you that number again, but you would just text coping to 33777. So for those of you who are essential workers or are family members of essential workers, you really have some unique and different stressors that you're dealing with right now. I think we're all dealing with multiple stressors with this pandemic. And for the essential workers who, thank you for your service, and you're at the front line and you're keeping the fabric of our society together right now. And we're all grateful for everybody's service. But it does bring some unique stressors. Of course, here's a list of some of the things: fear of contracting the virus, of infecting loved ones, if still living with loved ones. Some people who are essential workers have chosen not to live with their loved ones and are dealing with some separation and loss. This is really a trauma for all of us right now. It's, I think, very difficult to wrap our brains around this pandemic and what it means socially, economically, globally. And it's pretty overwhelming and stressful for our psyches to process. So I think a lot of people are having trauma responses, which might include difficulty sleeping or nightmares or that type of thing. And it's a normal response to everything that we're going through, as is anxiety and overwhelm, a totally normal response to being an essential worker. People who are essential workers might be feeling a lot of responsibility to others. Unfortunately, they may also be dealing with stigma. If other people are like, why are you putting your family in danger? Why are you going to work every day? That's really a difficult situation when making such an important sacrifice for communities and for loved ones, and to also be dealing with some stigma. So again, we're all dealing with fears of uncertainty and the unknown in the future. And some essential employees may be upset that they're being asked to work. They may have some feelings of resentment to their employer, or some feelings of guilt and anxiety, in relation to their family members. So for the family members, also concern for health and safety for themselves and for their family members. Many of us are adjusting to working from home if you also work. And the demands of parenting and homeschooling. I mean, I think especially toddler-aged and school-aged children, it's very, very difficult. I have two high school daughters and a stepson who's in college, all at home with me. And I know the research said actually that age group is one of the more difficult in terms of being able to process this and dealing with their own grief and loss. So it can be really challenging in our relationships, kind of managing all of those dynamics. And some feelings of loneliness. If your partner is an essential worker and out and busy, you may be dealing with a variety of feelings that are a normal response to everything that you're going through. I really encourage you, if you're feeling angry or sad or frustrated, to really just honor and accept those feelings as part of your process, and to not judge them, you know, to really practice some self-compassion. I think our feelings are a normal response to everything that we're going through. So right now, external sources of stress, maybe you're still trying to keep up with a job at home, housework, dependent care. Maybe you're caring for a brain injury survivor or children or an elderly loved one, somebody who's sick, dealing with parenting responsibilities. And then with COVID-19, I think many of us are experiencing financial anxiety and concerns and stress, as obviously the unemployment rates have gone up and the stock market has had a lot of difficulty. And we're also dealing with a lot of togetherness in our homes. You know, we're used to going out to school and to work and kind of having a balance between separation and togetherness. And we don't have that anymore. We don't have the same sorts of social support that we normally have. And that can be enormously stressful in a number of different ways. So internal sources of stress, this is kind of what we do to ourselves, that we can really empower ourselves as, oops, I'm sorry, I had a little snafu here with my PowerPoint. I'm so sorry. If you would just give me one moment to try and bring up the correct PowerPoint. Here we are. It is back. That is good. Play from start. I apologize. Thank you for your patience with this. This is the slide we were on. Play from current slide. It should bring that up, but unfortunately it is not. I really apologize for this, but hopefully you can see this as best as possible. Kristen, how is it looking to you? I am unable to see the chat. I'm going to look in the chat. Okay, everything okay? I'm assuming it's okay. So for those of you that are home, stresses for the family members, some loneliness, and you know, some feelings of guilt or anxiety. So mental health implications during this time. Personally, I think we all deal with mental health issues as part of the human condition from time to time. And so we all deal with stress, anxiety, depression. I think, you know, addiction is very common in many families. And right now with COVID-19, it's really stressing our mental health. And so whatever issues you may have dealt with in the past may be kind of resurfacing. And I really do think that we're all dealing with acute stress at this time. So it's really important to be aware that you may be having some of these symptoms. I'm hearing a lot from my clients and my students about having difficulty concentrating or kind of a distorted sense of time. And all of that can be very challenging. So external sources of stress, we started to go through some of those. Internal sources of stress these are the things that you can control. So are you having unrealistic expectations about the future? That can definitely is a setup for disappointment. Negative thinking. Cognitive behavioral therapy says that it's our thoughts that precede our emotions and our behaviors. So the best way to reduce our stress and to feel better is to pay attention to our self-talk. If we're having negative or catastrophic fear-based thinking, we're going to fuel stress, anxiety, and depression. So we want to do our best to compassionately coach ourselves through this time. We want to pay attention to any self-sabotaging behaviors. We're all human, we're not perfect. And this is a time especially where we may revert to some poor coping skills, maybe over drinking or overeating. I know I'm concerned about the quarantine 15, so just making sure that your self-care is healthy and that you are taking time for self-care, especially if you're a caregiver. So making sure that you are carving out space and time to take care of yourself first, and that you're accessing support. Signs and symptoms of stress can be physical. So you might be dealing with sleep disturbance, appetite disturbance, some headaches or gastrointestinal problems. Those are normal responses to stress. Emotional symptoms of stress might include irritability, crabbiness, some anger, some sadness, just feeling kind of overwhelmed. Cognitive might be difficulties thinking clearly, focusing, making decisions. Socially, it can be isolation. I mean, obviously, we're all somewhat isolated anyway, but maybe you're not reaching out to your friends, or you're ignoring FaceTime calls, or you're not setting up time for Zoom meetings or time to connect with others. And isolation can really fuel some of these mental health symptoms. And again, financial stress is a very real symptom for many of us right now. I do want to mention that burnout is a more severe form of chronic stress. And these are some of the signs and symptoms of burnout. So if you recognize any of these in yourself, you may really want to think about what you can do to continue your self-care. It's so good that you're watching this presentation today and taking time for yourself, but this means that your cup is empty. I always like to ask people, if you were a cell phone, what do you think your battery would be at? And we're not like cell phones. We don't get the little red bar alert that lets us know if we're in low power mode. So we need to check in with ourselves internally and notice when we're feeling exhausted and depleted. And when we are, it's time to really be kind to ourselves and nurture ourselves with some self-care. So now that we've covered all of the stressful things, we're going to give you some tools and tips for how to deal with this. We're going to talk about coping skills, communication and conflict resolution skills, and how to just build resilience during this time. So first and foremost, I ask you to prioritize your own health and well-being, that you really focus on prioritizing yourself, your sleep, your nutrition, your exercise, and time for leisure. I know when you have multiple responsibilities, this can be the hardest thing to do. And if you have a family member who's an essential worker, you may feel guilty taking time for yourself, but it's the best for your family system if you are healthy and well. Then you have more to give without being exhausted, depleted, or resentful. So you really want to prioritize your self-care as you structure your days and weeks. I think for many of us, each day is feeling a little bit like Groundhog Day, where every day is like the day before, because we don't have the same systems in place like work and school and other responsibilities that kind of keep us structured. So you need to create a routine for yourself, a time to go to sleep, a time to wake up, meal time, time for work, time for family, and that you're accessing support. As a therapist, I think we all need support, especially at a time like this. And you also want to reduce how much time you're spending watching the news and maybe limit it to once or twice a day. I tend to look first thing in the morning and then again around 6 p.m. so that I'm informed, but that I'm not overwhelmed when it's time to go to bed. In families right now, it's really challenging finding time for solitude and connection and finding that balance. And many of us may be dealing with some issues around space in our homes, so that can certainly be challenging. So definitely thinking through about, in a perfect world, how much alone time do you need? How much does your partner need or your kids need? And how can you create that maybe in little spaces in your home, in your schedule? It's really important to think that through as stress reduction for everyone. So mindfulness is a practice that many therapists recommend that really is based in Zen Buddhism. It's thousands of years old, but Jon Kabat-Zinn is kind of the founding father of mindfulness in the United States, and he teaches mindfulness stress reduction. So one of the easiest ways to do that is to focus on your breath. I know it sounds very simple, but across thousands of years and hundreds of cultures, people believe that the breath is tied together by the mind, the body, and the spirit. And we can calm our minds and relax our bodies simply by bringing our attention to our breath. We can also stop worrying about the future, which I think a lot of us are doing, understandably, right now. Uncertainty is very stressful for people to deal with. We like to know and to plan. And right now, that's very, very difficult. So we can find peace by staying in the present moment through practices like deep breathing, meditation, which I love. I'm going to give you some resources for meditation, and yoga, which is meditation for movement. I avoided yoga for many years because I was intimidated by it, but yoga is for everyone. And a basic class on YouTube could be something that would be, a really good form of self-care. So we really want to kind of take it one day at a time. It's also a time to practice self-compassion and compassion for others. So I really believe that empathy is the magic wand in relationships. So if you're having communication issues or relationship challenges in your home right now, empathy is the #1 tool in your toolbox. And it doesn't mean that you have to agree with how the person feels. It just means that you're demonstrating that you understand how they feel. Because if you've ever had someone minimize how you're feeling or tell you that you shouldn't feel how you're feeling, it's pretty upsetting, right? So the best way to diffuse somebody who's upset is to say, I understand that you're scared. I understand that you're stressed out. Of course, that would be overwhelming. Of course, you're feeling angry right now. Of course, you're frustrated. The more that you can do that, the more people feel understood and heard and validated. If they don't have empathy, they'll get louder and up the ante. So we don't want to engage in an argument about somebody else's feelings because they just are what they are. So kind of accepting that. We also want to make sure we're not assuming that we know how someone is feeling. So if you've got an essential worker, you might be feeling like they, maybe they're upset that they need to go to work, but maybe actually that's a really positive source of self-esteem for them and a way to experience some sense of control. So rather than kind of projecting what we imagine they might be feeling, we want to ask them, hey, open-ended questions. How are you doing? What can I do for you? What do you need from me? That type of thing. And give people space and time. If you're dealing with an essential worker who is dealing in healthcare, they're seeing a lot of trauma right now, and it's got to be pretty overwhelming. And when people experience trauma, they often shut down and can become kind of withdrawn or disconnected. So it's important not to personalize that and to take that as some sort of rejection, but to understand that that's their emotional response, they're a way of coping. So having respect for that, I think, is really, really important. And then practicing self-compassion is also really important. So honoring your own feelings, not judging them. We have that inner critic, that voice in our head that is sometimes really hard on us and really can trigger feelings of shame or anxiety. And so we want to become aware of that inner critic. That's part of cognitive behavioral therapy, is becoming aware of our self-talk. And instead of speaking to ourselves like our worst enemy, we can make a choice to speak to ourselves as our own best friend, as our own loving parent or compassionate advocate. So if you're telling yourself, unhelpful messages like you should be nicer, you should be more patient, you're being unkind, that's just going to make you feel worse. But if you, coach yourself through this and say, you're just a human being, this is very stressful, you're doing the best that you can, and that's all you can do. And really practice some self-forgiveness, forgive yourself. If you haven't been perfect, none of us are. This is a very challenging and stressful time. So really practicing compassion both ways, for yourself and for your loved ones. It's really important right now to focus on what you can control. There's so much that is beyond our control right now. On the right side of this slide, it shows, what's out of your control, and that's other people's thoughts, other people's emotions, their behaviors, their choices. This whole pandemic is out of our control. The only things that we have control over are our own thinking, our way of expressing our emotions, the behaviors that we choose, and our own choices. So we can choose to have more positive thinking. We can choose to manage our emotions in a healthier way. We can choose behaviors that are self-care instead of self-sabotage, so that we can be more resilient and kind of move through this time as individuals and as a family together. I know everybody is under stress right now. Accessing support is so important. And did you know that teletherapy is being covered by virtually all insurance companies right now? And some of them, like Aetna, have even waived their copays completely. So it's free. So it's video conferencing, much like this. So you would log on with a therapist like myself, and your insurance would be billed, and you would be in the safety of your home. I have some clients who don't have privacy from their partners, for example, and they need a little session to vent. And so they've had their sessions while going for a walk around the neighborhood or from their car, so that they can have a confidential session. And I'll give you some resources for support, for finding support and finding a therapist at the end of this presentation. But there's all kinds of online support groups. I personally am a huge advocate for destigmatizing mental health. Again, I think we all deal with it at different points in our lives. We have mental health just like we have physical health, and we need to take care of it, especially at a time like this. So we really don't want to minimize or ignore our feelings, especially if you're a caretaker. Sometimes you just might be so used to taking care of others that you forget to take care of yourself. And I'm really asking and encouraging you to recognize that you're very important, and it's important for you to get support for yourself when you're caring for so many others. So we talked about turning down the volume of your inner critic, becoming mindful of when you're having fear-based or catastrophic thinking, putting up a mental red flag, letting yourself know that that's not super helpful right now, and practicing some calming affirmations like, this too shall pass, I'm doing the best that I can, we will get through this together. I love Louise Hay's affirmations. If you want to follow her on social media, her whole organization has a lot of just positive messages. I post a lot on Pinterest and Instagram as well. It's important to kind of keep our thinking as positive as we can at this time. One of the easiest ways to do that is to practice gratitude. And if you've ever kept a gratitude journal, that's a nice thing to do. Maybe before you go to bed, write down 3 things that you are grateful for that day, and try to make them different each day. That's something I do as I fall asleep. I kind of roll through and think what I was grateful for that day. And it does help you to look at the good parts. If you have kids or a spouse that is developing some negative thinking, there's some cognitive behavioral workbooks that can be really helpful. When my daughter Celeste was 9, I got her a book called No More Stinking Thinking, and because she was starting to be kind of a glass is half empty type person. And right now it's really easy for us to do that, to look at being stuck at home, to look at all the things we can't do. And so it takes some effort to shift our thinking and pay attention to, oh my gosh, I have my health today. I am with loved ones today. I have my pet. I have food. I have, flowers are starting to come up in the yard. And that can actually make us feel better mentally and physically. Detachment is a skill that I think all of us need to develop, especially in relationships when we're having any type of conflict. And detachment doesn't mean that you don't care or that you're not connected or you're being unkind or aloof in some way. It really is a mindfulness practice of healthy separation from other people's stuff. So a good analogy is a lifeguard analogy. If somebody is drowning, the lifeguards are taught not to get in the water with them. That the best thing to do is to throw them something, to pull them in, give them your arm, but not jump in the water. So you want to be safely outside the water, at the edge of the pool or in a boat or whatever. And that means that you're going to have some healthy separation from the other person. It means not getting hooked, not becoming defensive, and not attaching your own well-being to others. So, if somebody is mad at you, working at not letting that change your mood state. That's their stuff. And you can protect yourself by kind of imagining that you're surrounded by white light or a bubble, a safe bubble, or a plexiglass shield that's separating you from them. My friend Ross always says, observe, don't absorb. So if you've got a kid or a spouse, freaking out, you can observe them, but you don't have to take on their mood state. That's what healthy detachment is. You can also learn how to detach from your own fear, anxiety, anger, or sadness. And this is the ability to observe your feelings. It is a mindfulness practice that you can develop through meditation and deeper awareness, connecting with your breath, where you can realize that you're feeling sadness, or maybe you're feeling grief. I think, the Harvard Business Review had an interesting article that uncomfortable feeling that we're all having right now is grief. We're feeling grief and loss for the lives that we used to have, or the events that we thought we'd be living right now. So we need to honor those, but we can choose to observe them and honor them rather than allowing them to overcome us. We can detach from the negative emotions of others, as we've discussed, and we can also detach from expectations and outcome. So this is tricky. It's easy for us right now to say, I'll feel better when May 30th, I can go out and live life as normal. Well, if we attach our happiness to that and that doesn't happen, it's a setup for failure. So we need to kind of recalibrate our expectations to zero and kind of take this one day at a time and focus on the present moment. These are some detachment strategies. So if you're having a conflict with your loved one, the ability to kind of zoom out in time and space and see that interaction from a much larger perspective. Because when we're in a conflict, it can be very easy for us to feel like it's the biggest issue right now and it's just completely paramount that we get this resolved. But if we can zoom out and step back, we can have greater perspective that maybe what we're fighting about isn't actually what we're fighting about. Oftentimes we fight about little things like minutia, when actually there's something bigger going on, like the fear that we're all experiencing at this time. So if you're having conflict with someone, dropping your at the end of the rope if it's getting escalated. I mean, we're sheltering in place right now, and so we can't leave in the way that we normally would unless it's to go for a walk around the block. So sometimes it's best to just let go of your end of the tug of war rope and do the next right thing. Breathe, go take a shower, go take a bath, go for a walk around the block. Tell your loved one, I'm not in a good space right now. Let's sleep on this and revisit this conversation in the morning. The nature of conflict is these are the things that we fight about. So it might be the minutia. We might think that we're talking about, who's doing more cleaning at home or more laundry, but everything boils down to this: power, control, fear, misunderstanding, and contrasting beliefs. And right now, I think control is an issue for many of us because we're experiencing not having a lot of control in our lives. And so we may be hyper-focused on what we can control right now so that we can feel better. But that may be causing some relationship strain. So to be mindful of that. Dr. John Gottman is the guru of couples counseling, and he wrote a book called why marriages succeed or fail. And I don't think it matters if you're married or not, if you're in a relationship or partnership. These are the 4 behaviors that he identified that add fuel to the fire of conflict. The first 2 in the research, women tend to be a little bit more guilty of, and the second 2, men tend to be more guilty of, but we can all do them. So criticism is when we attack the person's character. It's perfectly fine to focus on a behavior, to say something like, you know, it upsets me when you leave your clothes on the floor. That's fine. It would really mean a lot to me if you would pick up your clothes on the floor. That's something that stresses me out. Instead of, you know what, you are a total slob. That is criticism, when you attack the person's character. Contempt is a lot of nonverbal kind of messages of disgust. So if you're like eye rolling or making sounds like that, making faces, crossing your arms, all of that can really make somebody defensive. So being mindful of not doing that. Stonewalling is the shutdown, when people just refuse to talk. And it can be really infuriating and super frustrating for the other party. So if you or your partner have a tendency to shut down, it's really important that you at least say, you know, I'm shutting down. I need, you know, a half hour, or I need us to give it a day and let's revisit this conversation. But you can't just refuse to talk about something. Defensiveness, we all get defensive. We all have egos. It's part of the human condition, but being aware of when you're making excuses or you're saying but, and maybe, you know, tit for tat arguing, it's not super helpful. On the other side of the positives, if you haven't read the 5 love languages, I think this is a great time to read a book that might be nurturing for your relationships, and love languages are with kids too. So Gary Chapman wrote the 5 love languages, and he said that the 5 love languages are gifts, acts of service, words of affirmation, quality time, and physical touch. And some of us prefer to give love in a certain way, and others, you know, prefer to receive it in a different way. And we and our partners might not always be matched. So we want to make sure that we're communicating the same language and showing our partners support in the way that they really feel it. So that's a nice activity to do, maybe learn each other's love languages at this time. So I really like being a therapist and helping couples with their communication and conflict resolution, because I personally think that conflict is healthy and normal, and that we can all work to get better at it. It's a skill we can develop. And it's sort of on a continuum. I always joke that healthy self-esteem is midway between diva and doormat. So the diva is somebody who is entitled and not respectful of other people's boundaries. And the doormat is somebody who's not respectful of his or her own boundaries. So healthy self-esteem is in the middle, where you reflect confidence and self-respect and also respect for the other person. And you communicate in a way that is assertive and clear and diplomatic. So we want to avoid passive conflict styles, which might be kind of avoidant, passive aggressive. You know, you're mad at somebody, but you're not being direct about it. So you're just ignoring them and giving the silent treatment or slamming doors or that type of thing. And certainly aggressive. We don't want to be aggressive at this point when we're all under stress. So, you know, working our best to develop some of those assertiveness skills. Emotional intelligence is something that we can all work on as well. And it's a process of knowing and managing our own emotions. And it's a skill. It takes some maturity, it takes some self-awareness, some mindfulness, and, you know, honoring our feelings, not judging them, letting us have them, but managing them in your relationships so that you're not being hurtful or destructive in relationships. And then also using that empathy so that you are really working at understanding where the other person is coming from and then managing the relationship to the best of your ability by communicating and collaborating together. So low emotional intelligence, this is some of the behaviors that you might see. People who get triggered, really defensive, maybe blaming other people and not taking responsibility for themselves, or bullying others. Those are signs of low emotional intelligence. High emotional intelligence is all the things that we've been talking about. And Daniel Goleman wrote a book about emotional intelligence that's really good if you want to learn more and work on that for yourself. So again, if you're having conflict in your household right now, we are all kind of biologically primed to respond to conflict with either a fight, flight, or freeze response. And so we really want to avoid that, because that's kind of an unconscious response to fear. We want to respond in a more present and intuitive and thoughtful, less reactive way. So we don't want to engage in a tug of war. We want to use that zooming out to gain perspective. We want to take responsibility for ourselves. So if we've said or done something hurtful, we want to make amends by saying that we're sorry and apologizing instead of, making excuses, and just really trying to be flexible and adaptable and compromise. So communicating with others about some of these difficult topics that may come up about how are we all going to feel safe? And people may have some different levels of concern or worry about this virus. I think some people feel like, maybe we're all going to get it and it's like a cold or a flu, and other people are very concerned about mortality or being very ill, and kind of everything in between. So we need to be respectful of each other's, opinions, and then also be able to have conversations, because when somebody's, behaviors can impact your own health, that's a serious issue. So I definitely encourage you to, again, prioritize your well-being and use your assertive communication to express what you need in a way that is diplomatic and honest and clear and boundary. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in a couple slides here. So to the ways to support others, I think we get what we give. So if we're a good friend and a good partner to our loved ones, that will come back to us. So sometimes we have to be the bigger person and step up and, provide encouragement, provide support. If you've got that essential worker, thank them for their service, really appreciate what they're doing, and take some time to nurture the relationship. Create a date night. My husband made me dinner the other night. We spent an hour playing backgammon, and it made me feel better for 3 days. So just, taking a moment to be thoughtful and nurture the relationship, even though we all may be kind of, on a gerbil wheel of just trying to stay afloat at this time. Again, assertive communication, you speak in terms of I rather than you. So it's I would prefer that you wear gloves and a mask when you go to the store, rather than you are being selfish. So that when we speak in terms of you, it makes other people defensive, and it makes them less defensive when we speak in terms of I also find that when we're angry, it's usually because we're afraid or we're sad. And so if we can speak from that more vulnerable place of sadness or fear, rather than anger, we can make other people less defensive and more likely to listen to us. We want to make honest and direct and clear requests. We don't want to expect people to mind read. I think sometimes in our partnerships, we just wish people would know what we need, but that isn't how people are. We do sometimes have to be really clear about what we need. And so it might be that you need some alone time, that you're going to go in the bedroom and take a bath and read a book for a couple hours, and you need your partner to handle the kids, whatever it is. And always communication face to face is a lot more productive than email or text. I'm sure we've all gotten in text fights in our days, and they're not fun. So there's just lots of misunderstanding that can happen in that type of situation. So when possible, making sure that you are communicating face-to-face. Next best is voicemail, or phone call, because when you can hear someone's tone of voice, we're not imagining how they're feeling in the way that we do when we read a text. Sometimes we read texts in the mood state that we're in. So if we're crabby, we read it in kind of a flat and sarcastic way, when that may not at all be what the person was intending. So, really working on collaborating, which, involves some compromise. So being the bigger person and realizing we're not going to all get our way all the time. So what things can you concede on, and what things can't you? And to be honest and clear about that, because if you're not honest and clear when you set your boundaries, it's a setup for resentment. And resentment is hardened anger that can corrode a relationship. So if you feel like you could benefit from some work on boundaries, Doctors Cloud and Townsend have a website. It's I always mess it up, cloudandtownsend.com. And they've written a ton of boundaries books. They do have kind of a Christian bent. So if that's not your thing, just kind of take that with a grain of salt. But otherwise, it's really, really good information on boundaries at work, boundaries with family. And boundaries are something that we all kind of need to learn to set, whether they're financial, they're safety boundaries, they're emotional boundaries, sexual boundaries, whatever it is. We really need to work at communicating the boundaries in our relationships so that we feel safe and comfortable, and we also feel connected, and that there's an opportunity for intimacy. So that's important. Talking to your kids about COVID-19, it's really important to remain calm and reassuring, because when kids, even teenagers, when they hear us fight, they get scared. And when they see us anxious and worried, they get anxious and worried. So again, the best way we can take care of our loved ones is to take care of our own mental state, so that we can be as calm and positive as possible. We want to avoid scaring them. So being mindful of what adult conversations you're having around your kids. So let's say your partner got laid off, or you got laid off, or there's a fear of that, or there's been a loss of income. Maybe you work in the restaurant industry, or an industry that's been really negatively impacted. To not talk about your fears directly in front of the kids, because they'll absorb that and take that on. So really having good boundaries between those adult conversations and what the kids need to be privy to, and making sure you're available to talk with them, that you're checking in and say, hey, how are you feeling about all this virus stuff? And depending on the age of your kids, I know I have clients and friends who have kids under the age of 5 who are just kind of oblivious. Younger kids that are home from school, maybe doing reasonably well. Others, maybe really are getting super bored and frustrated and confused and acting out in some ways, and that can be very challenging. Teenagers, I think it's, they think that they're grown-ups and can do what they want to do, so it's hard to sometimes enforce the shelter in place with teenagers and make sure that they understand how important that is. So definitely challenging with people learning from home as well. So I think everyone is having challenges across the board. And so just to remember that it's a time that everyone's under stress, and all we can do is the best we can do. But to pay attention to how much your kids are reading or seeing about the news or the media. And if they do ask you questions, to make sure it's age appropriate, that you're not telling a 5-year-old what you would tell a 15-year-old, for example. Just speak their language at their level, and only what they need to know. If they want to know more, they will ask. And I think just always answer their questions as honestly and age appropriately as you can. So forgiving yourself and others, Nelson Mandela said resentment is like drinking poison and hoping it will kill your enemies. I think, forgiveness sets us free. So instead of holding grudges, kind of, forgiving our loved ones for any poor behaviors at this time, forgiving ourselves, recognizing that we're all under stress and that this is an unprecedented time that with multiple levels of stress and trauma. And, it's not a time to make any big decisions, I think, about your relationship, or breaking up or anything like that. Just to recognize that we're in this very strange time right now and it will pass, and help is available. So again, this is temporary, this will pass. Here are some qualities of resilient people that I'd like you to think about, promoting your own health and wellness, being emotionally intelligent, avoiding worrying. It's just really not helpful. I do think having a sense of humor, even though this pandemic is very, very serious, I think, looking at some of the funny memes, having a sense of humor about it is a way to cope that is healthy. And, looking for that work-life balance also. I think when we're at home, we really could work 24/7 if we didn't stop ourselves. So making sure that you're prioritizing your self-care, that you're having time for hobbies, time for sleep, time for connection with your partner, and that you're not isolating. If we have a sense of purpose or meaning in life, that can really help us with resilience. So if you do have a spiritual self, it doesn't have to be religious, it could be meditation or connecting with nature. Sometimes that can really be helpful in terms of coping. I have a whole bunch of resources for you. Again, I really apologize. I don't know why my PowerPoint is acting strange like this. I'm getting a message that my computer's out of memory or something. And so I think it's causing the PowerPoint to not display correctly. So I'm so sorry about that. But these slides are available on that text campaign, and each one of these resources is a clickable link. So if you want to learn how to care for your coronavirus anxiety, or you want some tools for stress and coping, or some information about mental health issues during this time, you could click on these and it'll bring you right to their website. There's also, I mentioned teletherapy, that teletherapy is being covered by most insurance. And if you don't have insurance, community mental health centers are also offering teletherapy. And you can find a teletherapy therapist through NAMI, which is the National Alliance for Mental Illness. They will let you know the community mental health center in your area. Here's at the top are a couple other free resources. United Healthcare has set up a 1-800 number that is a 24/7 call line. If you're just all of a sudden feeling some panic or distress about this whole situation or anything, your relationship, your mental health, feeling depressed, feeling anxious, you can call this number and speak with a licensed counselor like myself. There's also this text number where you can speak with a crisis counselor. I've had many clients use those services. You don't have to be suicidal or something like that. You can just need to talk to someone. And if you want to talk to someone, help is available. So please reach out. Therapy does not mean that you're crazy or that you're in crisis. It's something healthy and proactive. I have been in therapy. I think we all should be in therapy at different points in our lives. I think it's a healthy and preventative form of healthcare, like going to the dentist or the doctor. Psychology Today is kind of like Match.com for finding a therapist. And you can click on that and see their photos and how many years they've been in practice and what their areas of specialty are and what type of insurance they take. And a lot of people don't realize that insurance covers therapy. And so, I think some people think, oh, it's going to be like $100 a session or more. Your insurance, if you see an in-network provider, sometimes the copay is $15, $25, $20. And again, with this pandemic, some insurance companies have waived the copays entirely. Some good self-care, these are some meditation resources, apps like Calm and Headspace, they have parts that are for kids, and they have breathing exercises and guided meditations that can also really help you promote sleep. So again, if you would like these handouts or any of the resources that I've posted, you could text the word coping to 33777. And finally, this is my contact information here. And you could feel free to email me if you have any questions that you don't feel comfortable asking in the chat. And I am happy to be a support and a resource to you.